Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Jeff Kerrie. As I understand, you are a pilot. Is that correct?
I'll take you up for a half hour and let you do an intro to flying. And I was like, yes, this is something I want to do.
So where do you like to fly? What kind of certifications do you have to have? How much does it cost?
Pilots talk about the $100 hamburger, which is when you get in the plane and you fly up to, Comox for lunch. And that's your $100 hamburger because of the fuel. It's about a 4.5 hour drive to Tofino. I've discovered that it's a 43-minute flight in my plane. This can be a work expense for a physician. So I haven't forgotten how to land yet. Thank God.
Welcome to the Interesting MD podcast, the show about what doctors do when we aren't seeing patients and how this can help us find balance and prevent burnout. I'm your host, Rob Beck. All right, welcome to another episode of the Interesting MD podcast. Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Jeff Kerrie. Jeff, you are our first Canadian doctor on the podcast, so I want you to feel really welcomed and feel really special about that.
In the middle of this trade war, I'm very excited to come on here and just badmouth my colleagues to the south. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So Jeff, we'll just get started here. So where are you right now? And where'd you come from? Where'd you train?
Yeah. Well, I am the king of medical ADHD, so I do a lot of different stuff, which is really, I think, why you and I have some kinship. I live and work both in Victoria, BC and Vancouver, BC, splitting my time between the two so that I can do a bunch of fun different things that keep me interested. So I grew up about an hour away from Vancouver. And following that, went to university in Victoria, where I fell madly in love with Victoria, which is why I think you and I are both madly in love with Victoria and spending time there. Following that, I went out to Winnipeg thinking I was going to be a medical virologist and worked at the National Microbiology Lab there, starting a master's, which it turned out I was terribly inept at. I was far too social, and I had a supervisor who hated that I didn't live in the lab, and he was very upset that I was doing theater and on student council. And so thankfully, about 1.5 years into it, I had thought about med school forever and had some life circumstances where I needed to, I guess, reset, and decided to study and apply for med school, and then was very lucky to get in Manitoba, where I was on my first application. So that started the medical journey. I always thought
just let me stop you there. That's kind of my story too. I got out of undergrad. I was like, I'm never going back to school again. I moved to Ohio. I got a job as an environmental consultant. I tell everybody that I worked for Satan, and that was just, I was an endangered species bat biologist, and it sounded really fun for a little bit, and then it was like, I gotta go do something else. So. Anyway.
Yeah, molecular virology sounded so cool. I was in love with Ebola, and I thought, it's a level 4 lab out there, which of course they let me nowhere near. I was not in the level 4 program. I was not allowed near it.
Every outbreak in Manitoba started with you.
But I got them back because years later I got to go do some Ebola work overseas. So it all came around. But did med school, wanted to do ICU, and tried to figure a path there. And so choose internal medicine, which, as you know, in Canada is a little more of an in-depth specialty, I think, than some of the times it is in the States, right? You can be primary care, from what I understand, although I know that's shifting. So I did that, and then matched to an ICU fellowship and realized I was old and there were no jobs, and they kept talking about another second or third fellowship. So I actually pulled out after the CARMS match, much to the chagrin of my wonderful mentors, although they were incredibly supportive. And started practicing. And then I am the opposite of you in terms of school. I love school. I couldn't wait to go back. So I did a master's in ethics once I started practicing, and have sort of followed a path of chasing the shiny things that keep me interested. That makes sense.
You have come to the right place then.
Yeah.
So thank you. Yeah. I mean, admittedly, after I said I never wanted to go back to school, I did go back. I got a master's and then went to med school. So I ended up actually doing another 6 years. So, but now I'm done, I think. So,
or you and I could get PhDs together. We could go back to school and we could form a frat. It would be fantastic.
it's going to be old school.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
Frank the Tank. Okay, I'm Frank
Yeah.
the Tank.
Perfect. Yeah, no, as long, I guess it sounds like neither one of us can work in a lab. So our PhD is going to have to be in something that's not lab based.
Yeah,
So,
something fun and practical.
Right.
Yeah,
Lots of field research.
Exactly.
All right. So what are you doing now? What's your job now?
Oh, which one? So I am still a practicing internist, although I've cut down some of my hospital work. I work in an obesity metabolic health clinic out of Vancouver. I do dive and hyperbaric medicine out of Vancouver, which is our only provincial hyperbaric chamber here. And it's one of the reasons I get to spend part of the time in Vancouver. I am a clinical ethicist and run the ethics program at Island Health. And then as of April last year, I decided to try my hand at medical leadership. Well, I actually had been a director in quality and ethics for a few years, and an opportunity to get into the executive medical side of things came up. And so maybe against better judgment, I have taken on a quote unquote full-time job as an executive medical director in patient quality, safety, research, ethics, accreditation, policy. I'm missing a couple, but
right. They pop up. They add something new here.
Exactly.
The next email, you're like, oh, I do that now.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
That's exactly how medical leadership works. Yes.
All right. So you do a full-time job there. You do, how many does this all add up to at this point? So between the clinic, inpatient medicine, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're doctors. We don't really have what an FTE is, right? Like a 37-hour full-time job is like, 37 hours sounds lovely.
Yeah. How many of those can I get?
Yeah.
How many of those can I
Can I have two of those?
I have two, maybe three. I get a little bit bored.
Well, for those like looking at something different and maybe having the burnout that I was sort of feeling after COVID and things, the nice thing about when you get into these jobs is there actually comes with like benefits like health and dental and vacation and a pension and things. So there's some weird bonuses that I'd never heard of to the age of 47, and I'm learning to enjoy holiday Mondays now because I'm getting paid.
Yeah, like, I don't have to see a patient to get paid.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, paid for my time appropriately. Nice. So I do that full time, and then I do about 6 weeks of hospital now, and then a couple afternoons a month at the obesity clinic doing telehealth, and then a few days of hyperbaric every couple months. So, yeah, keep my finger in all the things that are interesting.
Yes, and I just for the listener, I think at this point it's my mom and now Jeff's mom that we've decided.
Yeah.
So
Hi,
go
Mom.
ahead, give your
Thanks so much for listening. We appreciate it.
It's our 2 streams. This is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks for getting us started.
Well, in that case, I have to say a shout out to Huxley, my partner's son as well, who is
absolutely.
a big supporter of my work and always
couldn't do it without you guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Couldn't do it without you guys.
Thanks, Hux.
So the big thing that we want to talk about today, the reason that you are on today, which again, you will be on quite a bit because of all the other things, all of the other things. But the big thing that we were going to talk about today was flying, because as I understand, you are a pilot. Is that correct?
That is right. Yeah.
Okay.
I've had sort of a love of anything aviation, aeronautical since I was a kid.
Did this start when you watched Top Gun for the first time?
Top Gun absolutely had something to do with it, as it should. I mean, 1986, I think I was 9, and I felt the need for speed.
Yeah, who didn't?
Yeah, and where I grew up, we used to they're down on the plains of Abbotsford here. There were skydivers, and so my grandmother, who helped raise me, would take me down, and we just watched the planes and watch the skydivers, and just thought, man, like that is cool. So the minute I turned 18, I ran down there because my parents wouldn't sign off as a teenager, and of course jumped out of one of their planes. And then I've been just sort of waited for the opportunity to learn to fly. When I was about 12, there was an intro to aviation for kids at the local college on a summer, and my parents sent me to it, which was an amazing gift. And we got to go up, we had to study like kind of ground school a week and then go up in a little Cessna, and they let you kind of help do a little touch and go and control the stick. And I just remember thinking like, this is the coolest thing ever, If you're not going to be an astronaut, at least be a pilot.
Right. Get close, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it was once I started practicing, I kind of realized I had a bit of time, and and really had the money, because it's not a cheap thing to get into. And so yeah, in about 2015 started my flying lessons.
Okay. And so what made you just decide that this was the time and that you were ready for it?
Yeah, I think it really was the time and money thing. Like I'd finished my master's then, so I had more time in the evenings, and I realized, okay, I've got a job now. I've been working for a few years. I'm paying down my debt. This is like a dream, and why would I wait? And I mean, as you know, and probably our mums and other listeners know, life is short, and in our work, we often see people who put off doing the things they dream of, right? And then we meet them as they realize that they've got a diagnosis that's not going to let them do that stuff. So,
That now
uh,
their heart disease prevents them from flying a
yeah,
plane again?
yeah. Or, how many people have you had who literally like have retired at 65 and said, I was planning this trip and now I've got cancer or something. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that was a real motivation to like, I kind of realized once I was a staff, like you just got to get out there and do the things that are exciting. And if you're making a little money, you might as well spend it. So, that's how I got into it.
Okay. All right. So how do you get started with that? So with somebody, um, well, I guess how long did the training take you
Yeah,
to
well, I'll
go
tell
through
you
it
how I got
first?
started is that you can actually go to these flying schools, and for, I don't know, $100, they'll take you up for a half hour and let you do an intro to flying. And so I did that for my birthday. I think I remember which birthday it was. Um, and I was like, yes, this is something I want to do.
What kind of certifications do you have to get started as a pilot?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways of doing like as a private pilot. So that's how you start out. You either do a recreational license, which is kind of a shorter version that doesn't allow you to have a number of passengers and other things. You kind of think of it as like a part way, like a learner's license. So you can
Right.
do that, or you can do what's called a PPL, which is your private pilot's license. So that's what I chose to do. Um, my ADD definitely got in the way. I will tell you, if you can afford it, time and money, go down to like Las Vegas and over like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, do the whole course. Get your 100 hours of flying in, and you will be a great pilot. I dragged mine out over about 2.5 years because I was constantly traveling for work. I went over, as I said, overseas to Africa during the Ebola crisis, so I was gone for a few months. So there was a number of times I kind of had to go back a few lessons and start over. So I don't recommend my version. I don't think it's
But
the safest either.
you're still with us, so it's perfectly
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
But so it's not something that like you get into it and you have to complete it. It's not like a residency, right? Where it's like you can't take time off. You're in it. You can kind of pick up where you need to, do what you can. If you can take 6 or 8 weeks to go to Vegas, good
Do
luck.
it.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah,
Uh,
so there's a ground school that you do in the evenings or weekends, and so that's one that you would do once or twice a week. Again, as a physician, I couldn't predict my schedule to say, yeah, every Wednesday and Saturday I'm going to go, which
yeah.
means, again, I did it backwards. I didn't do ground school. I did all of the flying over a couple of years, and then I went back and did an online ground school. Uh, because again, doctors do this the hard way, so I pretty much did it by video. Um, and then talk to instructors to kind of fill in the blanks there. But so I
Yeah.
recommend you do the ground school, then you go learn to fly.
Learn from the mistakes. Learn
Yes,
from Jeff's mistakes.
yes.
So I guess what's the difference? Like, what do you do in ground school? Because now I think, okay, getting a pilot's license, it's all just like kind of take off, fly,
Yeah.
land. And then what do you have to do for ground school? What is
Yeah,
that?
so much more. I can't remember, about 15 different areas of study. So, meteorology, people don't think, well, you have to really understand the weather, clouds, how to read weather maps to predict if you're going to be taking trips. There are parts on mechanics, like you actually learn how a four-stroke engine works from the inside out and understand how it cycles and how to troubleshoot. There's safety pieces. There's a lot of navigation. I mean, I'm about 10 years out, but I understand not much has changed, and you still learn everything with a pencil and a map, which once you become a pilot, you suddenly realize that everyone does it on an iPad in a much nicer fashion, but for some reason they don't like to teach it in the ground schools.
Just in case the
Um,
iPad goes out?
yeah, which makes sense, but most of us fly with like 3 backups. So we've got GPS. Yeah, so it's a bunch of different pieces like that that teach you more than just the flying part. And then there's the aviation regulation in Canada. Those called the CARs. So you have to know a lot of those inside and out. Yeah, a variety of things that eventually lead to you being a a person who's safe to go up in the air and make decisions. And if something goes wrong, has an idea how to get out of it.
Okay. All right. So you've got to learn all of those things. But
Mhm.
then all of that happens. How long does it take for you to get your private pilot's license? Like how many hours? I know
Yeah. So ground school
obviously
takes
six
about
to
2 months.
eight weeks to 2 years.
Yeah,
Um,
or longer. So the ground school, if you go in once or twice a week, I think it's about 2 months or 3 months on a cycle. The flying, you need minimum 80 hours in the air, and a certain percentage of those have to be solo. A certain percentage have to be what we call cross country, where you're going like more than 100 nautical miles away on a, you know, the famous one we would do when we trained in where I trained just outside of Vancouver is you'd fly to Chilliwack for pie. That was a cross country. There's a famous pie maker at the airport. So you would go on a run out to Chilliwack, get some pie, and fly home. And that was some of your cross country miles.
oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's got to be pretty. That's got to be a pretty flight as well,
Oh, it's
right?
gorgeous.
Flying
Yeah,
over some
through the
mountains and
mountains and through the valley. It's expensive pie.
right.
Pilots talk about the $100 hamburger, which is when you get in the plane and you fly up to Comox for lunch, and that's your $100 hamburger because of the fuel. But the $100 pie is a real thing still as well. So you can do those 80 hours or in whatever amount of time you can fit in. Most people that would be minimum probably a couple of months if you were really intensively flying 2 or 3 times a day. Um, I didn't realize, and I don't think a lot of people realize just how mentally taxing it is learning to fly. Like you really have to focus, which sounds dumb when I say it out loud. But it's like, it's intense in the beginning trying to learn all of the little things. Just flying straight and level feels like a lot at the beginning. And so, just like you're learning medicine and how to run a code and you take up to where you're running the code and directing all these people, flying is kind of similar. You have to manage all of the instruments. You have to manage your course, the radios. You have to always be listening with one ear when they call you over the radio. There's a lot of different pieces to that.
And so that keeps you pretty focused and gives you something definitely to think about when you're not, when you don't want to think about medicine, right? It is
Yes.
something you've got to kind of unplug from medicine, plug back in over here to flying. I'm sure that's
Yeah, it
takes
is.
up a lot of bandwidth.
It is one of those activities. I've always enjoyed activities that I think it's because I probably do have a little bit of ADHD, although not diagnosed. And so I've always enjoyed things that kept me hyper focused. I got really into skydiving in my 20s. I loved something that was so focusing. I love scuba diving now. I dive a number of times a year with a bunch of buddies. Again, it's one of those things where you have to be on your game and focused. And flying is another one of those. I enjoy it. It's having to focus. It's having to understand the machine, and then the freedom of just. I mean, I've just in the last few years got to zipping around the island, and it's pretty magical.
Really? So where
Mountain.
do you like to fly? We're going to take a little side trip here. Where do you
Yeah.
like to fly? Where do you like to go?
Well, where we live in Victoria, as you know, it's about a 4.5 hour drive to Tofino, 5 hour drive through windy roads that will make half your car sick. I've discovered that it's a 43-minute flight in my plane. And so
Oh,
that is fun. You can just go right over the mountains and through the mountains and then be there. You can go for lunch, you can go for a surf, and then you can fly home at the end of the day if you want. That's pretty fun. Or just flying up island to little communities, stopping in for lunch at the airport. And coming back is a lot of fun. I still haven't explored as far into the mainland as I need to since I moved to the island, but that's next.
so that's really incredible. I mean, honestly, I've not been to Tofino. I've been here for a little over 4 years. I've not been to Tofino because I don't want to take 5 hours to drive through all of those roads that are constantly like there's always a reason that road is closed,
Yeah.
and so I don't ever want to drive out there for it.
It sounds like you and I are going to Tofino for lunch. We're going to fly.
Yes. The
I'll,
$100 surf.
yeah, I'll take a nap and I'll show you just stay in that direction. You'll be fine.
Yeah, right. Like you keep the horizon on the something
Yeah.
or something about the horizon.
Something like that. The hard part is the
something.
taking off and landing. I mean, in the air, as long as you don't hit something, you're good.
I'm sure me flying over the mountains on the island is a really great idea.
Seems like a really great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd be sleeping really hard.
Your wife will check on your insurance before we go, I promise.
Yes, or be driving below us, like texting me.
I did have a fun flight last year where I flew up I took a friend who was interested in aviation. We went up the west coast of the island, cut across to Tofino, and then we came down over the beaches, where everyone hikes.
Yeah.
What am I thinking?
Like Sunset Beach, Mystic
Yeah.
Beach, all that,
Yes.
Sombrio.
And
Yeah.
so my partner and her friends and son were hiking. So I took her down to about 800 feet and waggled my wings over top, and they thought it was super cool. And I was Tom Cruise.
That is
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, you were flying upside down, right?
Yeah, well,
You
I
were
was maintaining
inverted
international relations, giving them the
relations.
bird.
There probably were some Americans that could see you. So yeah, for sure.
For your listeners, by the way, yes, I do look like Tom Cruise. Just
Yes.
imagine that.
Yeah.
Like a younger.
Don't look at the video.
Don't look at the video, please.
Yeah. Jeff looks like Tom Cruise. I probably look like Val Kilmer with
that's what I was
with
thinking.
a different filter.
Yeah, we'll find that filter later.
With the Val Kilmer filter. That's the second time Val Kilmer's come up in this podcast. And
I hope
really
it's not the one
obsessed.
with a hole in his throat then this time.
No.
Okay.
No. But I think the first one was a Ghost in the Darkness reference. But
yes.
Anyway, maybe that'll be like the thing on the podcast. I don't know. I'll find ways to fit in Val Kilmer.
Val Kilmer in it.
Yeah.
Till eventually he's on your show with you.
That's right.
That's the ultimate.
A special episode with Val Kilmer.
With Val Kilmer. I'm sure he's played a doctor.
Probably, right? All right. So you get your private pilot's license. What can you do with that? Like, how do you, like, obviously you're flying all over kind of Vancouver Island, and what can you do? How far can you go? Like, what kind of planes can you fly?
Yeah, so when you come out of it, depends what plane you were trained on. Most people get trained either on a Diamond, which is a low-wing plane, and more people actually train on a Cessna, which people are familiar with, a 152 or 172. And then usually you join a club. So I was in a club over in Delta where I did my training, and then when I got to the island, I joined the Victoria Flying Club. And so you rent a plane, and you're really only limited by your comfort and how far the fuel goes. So I did that for a while, and I probably didn't use it enough. It's a slow plane too, so it's a lot harder to take some of the fun trips. But eventually decided that I wanted to own a plane. I got introduced to a couple of people who are very good friends now who were pilots who had their own plane, and kind of got the bug. And so during COVID, my project, I was visiting a friend up north in BC to do some mountain flying, where he showed me kind of the ins and out of landing in the middle of nowhere. And I've got many crazy stories from that in the Rockies. But he had a plane that had been crashed in his farm. He has a runway. It had a nose gear collapse, and he can build anything. So the insurance company had sold him the plane. And after I looked at it and talked to him and saw what he'd done, we decided this was going to be my plane. And so I went to airplane summer camp, as we called it, where I went up and learned how to rivet and take things apart and wrench under close supervision. Let me be clear.
very
close supervision. And spent like part of the summer, and I'd fly up there all through COVID every once in a while and help build another piece and put it back together. And so over a couple years, we put this beautiful, what's called a Vans RV6 together. It's a little 2-seater plane that's very, very fast, much faster than a Cessna, which makes it pretty fun for zipping around in. And it can do some acrobatics. And I will say that before I bought it, I went in and a gentleman took me up in his RV6, and I swear to God, I did my first barrel roll. And that is when I was Tom Cruise in Top Gun.
Have to find this. Yes.
Yeah, I have the video. I will, if you want it for your website,
yes.
It's all yours. Yeah. It was very exciting.
You'll sign over the rights.
Yeah, exactly. So it was. When you buy a plane, you have to. What they say is you have to understand your mission. So if you want to take the family of 4 on places, you got to get a plane that's the right size to carry the luggage and the people. I was more interested in fun, quick trips and maybe learning some acrobatics.
Going really fast around the island and doing barrel rolls over people on the beach.
Yeah. So I went that route, and that's how I did it. So I bought a hangar and bought a little airplane, and that's been my last few years. I'm not flying enough is my biggest problem. It's hard when you're a doc and you're pulled in a million directions and you travel a lot. So that's my next mission to work on, is getting more hours up there.
Get more hours in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are there other levels or other certifications that you would need that you go to after this? So private pilot's license, you find your plane, but you say, okay, well, I want to do, what can you do differently?
Yeah,
with
so
it?
PPL lets you fly what's called VFR, so visual flight rules. You always have to be able to see the ground so you can follow on your map and know where you are. And it's daytime flying. So if you want, you can do a commercial pilot's license, even if you're not going to be a commercial pilot. It's really good training for things like IFR, which is instrument flying. So you can fly in the
Okay.
fog, you can fly in other things. So some people go that route, but it's, that's a 70, 80, $90,000 commitment. So if you're not going to use it, not a lot of people go that route.
For the neurosurgeons out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yes. Yeah. I took night flying. So in Victoria, I got an instructor and did my night flying rating. You can do float flying if you want to, which you can rent planes with floats and zip around the lakes of the island. My next one, I think, is going to be what's called over the top. So it's kind of halfway to that instrument flying, where if you have a cloudy day but there's a couple of holes, you're allowed to cross through those holes to get on top of the clouds. Because in
oh,
VFR flying, you can't go above cloud in that same way if it's a closed ceiling. So that'll be my next adventure, which I hope will then lead eventually to getting an IFR rating. Night flying is fun.
that sounds very, very cool.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that you had that certification. That's really fun.
Yeah.
And in the summers here, I guess that in the summers here, the sun's up so late, you don't really want to go flying after dark anyway. But in the winter here, it's always dark. So,
Yeah, that is the problem with training on the West Coast. And when you talk about sort of how long it takes, you got to work in the weather because here we get a lot of low cloud and rain and storms. Those aren't really places a student pilot wants to spend time in. If you have winds of a certain rate, they won't take you up. So that was another reason that really kind of slowed down my training is there's 3 or 4 months in the winter where you're lucky if you get a few hours here and there. So again,
okay.
another good reason to go to Vegas.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
You don't have to get rated for hot weather.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
like you could just go. All right. So, for the financial commitment, if you're not going to be a commercial pilot, where it's going to be $90,000, what is it? How much does it cost? How much does it cost just to get started? And if you want to get started, can you do just like a little discovery flight, or is it just kind of like you sign up and you again pay all your money up front
Yeah.
and you have to go and
Well, like I said before, the nice thing about the Discovery flight is it's they let you take the controls. You get to see what it's like. It's a little half-hour flight, so that's going to be your entry. Everyone should go do that, even if you don't become a pilot. Go do one of these fun Discovery flights, because they'll put you through your paces, and there's some fun things that they can do with the plane to stall and put you into a little bit of free fall and things, which are pretty fun. It's good, and then
that's a pretty intense 30 minutes there. I
it's
went
a good
up,
30
I
minutes.
like
Yeah,
went this way, went that way, they stalled the plane,
yeah.
I
We went into a bit of a
vomited and
dive.
passed
Yeah,
out, and
yeah.
okay.
If you want to do your full PPL, probably these days, I think you're probably looking at about 15 grand, maybe to 20 grand, depending how long it takes you. And the nice thing is it's pay as you go. So
Okay.
most schools, you would just pay for your flight hours as you go. So it's not a big upfront cost. So again, for docs, it's not unreasonable. I think if you're, not still paying off your $500,000 in loans.
Yeah.
So you pay for your ground school, you take that on the side, and then you pay for your flight time. You always pay a little more when you have to dual because, of course, having an instructor in the plane is more expensive. And then it actually gets cheaper once you're soloing. So,
Okay. Very well.
yeah.
All right. And is there any kind of qualification that you have to get started? Are there medical clearances? Are
Yeah.
there like certifications or something like that you have to do?
Yeah, the first things you have to do, you do have to have a medical clearance. There's different categories. So for a private pilot, it's fairly simple. That being said, if you have any health troubles, it can really affect your ability to fly. And you don't really think of that ahead of time. But small stuff, Health Canada or Transport Canada really has some sort of archaic rules around medications and things like that. So you want to look into that ahead of time. You'll
Yeah.
do a category 3 medical, I think it is, as a private. And then one of the first things you'll study for is your ROC A. So that's your radio operator certificate. So to use a radio in an airplane in Canada or a boat, you have to have a ROC A license. So that's part of your
Okay.
training. So that's one of the early certifications.
I know that I used to, in the United States, I would have to do flight physicals for some of my
Oh
patients.
yeah.
And so for the FAA would require that as well. And so I would do initial stuff and then send off all the labs and whatever else to somebody else who would do for the commercial pilots and things like that. Those guys would I would have to sign off on some stuff and then send it off to their private or like to the
Ah.
specialized flight medicine guy who would kind of approve the higher level stuff. But I would be able to uh, clear people that had their private pilot's license that,
Yeah,
would go out.
here you can't. You have to see an aviation physician,
Okay.
CAME, a certified aviation medical examiner, and so you
Okay.
see them for depending on your age and if you have any medical issues, you see them every 1 or 2 years generally, and then that goes to a central doctor who somehow manages the whole province.
Okay.
Which, as I say, if you have any medical issues, then that person becomes a bit of point of contact. So, yeah,
Okay.
the older you
Are
get, the
there
harder it gets. What are you going to say?
another reason to do it when you're
Yeah,
younger?
exactly.
Another reason to do it when you're younger. What about, are there any vision? You always hear this
Hmm.
stuff about pilots needing 20/20 vision or whatever else. I mean, is that something that actually matters now? Or
I think only if you're in Top Gun do you have to
okay,
have the 22
so
vision.
yeah, so if you want to be Maverick and not Goose, you
Yeah,
need to have 20/20 vision, but otherwise you're
yeah.
good.
I had glasses when I started flying, and then I had laser eyes or contacts, and I had laser eye surgery later. So of course, when you get laser eye surgery, you have to send that in to Transport Canada and check some boxes. So anything that changes in your health for the rest of your life, you're going to have to tell them about. It's
Okay.
very invasive. But you can absolutely have corrected vision. Color blindness, if I recall, I think you can still do private, but you can't do commercial. And
Okay.
certainly night flying, there's some specifics for vision and things like that.
Okay. All right. Any other things? I'm sure that there's probably like some sort of, like, what about people with asthma or,
Yeah,
getting into like all of your high altitude hyperbarics stuff, dive medicine stuff that you do? What about people who have asthma or,
yeah.
feel?
So I actually worry about more things with divers than I do with pilots,
Okay.
because underwater, there's really no time to think, so to speak, if something goes wrong. We're actually up in the air. You have some time. The saying is aviate, navigate, communicate. So you always worry about flying the plane first, where you are second, and the last thing you worry about is your radios and things. But new pilots get very nervous about radio calls. So, you just remember aviate first. So you manage the plane and then you manage your health the best you can. So we wouldn't send someone up who had angina or unstable asthma or, obviously seizures would be a problem. But the stuff that people don't think about that I've learned over the years is things as small as if you're on a small amount of an SSRI, for example,
Right.
so an antidepressant anxiolytic, um, they don't let you fly unless you get special permission to fly, which,
Yeah, I think that there were specific ones. I think citalopram for the FAA, at least,
yeah,
there were like very specific. It might have been, and this is now, it's been probably 5 years since I've done one of these, but I think that it was like sertraline and citalopram were the only ones that were allowed. I don't remember which
yeah.
one it was or why, but yeah, it was weird.
Up here, it's any of them, and it has to be essentially like you have to show stability and get a doctor's letter every 6 months to continue flying. Um, if you've had anything mildly cardiac, it changes your entire risk profile for them, no matter how revascularized and well you are. As I say, things that are fully exclusionary, things like seizure disorders,
Yeah.
you know, less stable mental health issues. But again, it's stuff that they don't really talk about. And so if you are a pilot as you age and things start to happen, and you and I have both seen patients for here in the hospital, right? Like I've had commercial pilots come in with a heart attack and had to say, "Oh, you may not fly again," depending on
Yeah.
what Transport Canada sees after. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like, and I'm okay with that. I'm sorry for you, but
yeah. But this, yeah, some of it doesn't make a lot of physiological sense, and the stigma I think it creates around mental health, around low doses of antidepressants.
Yeah,
I
I'm
think,
not sure that somebody on like 10 milligrams of citalopram is like
yeah,
a huge risk to
yeah,
society, more
yeah,
so than most of the doctors who are not on 10
and
milligrams of
should be.
citalopram.
Yes, as we all should be. Um, well, you think about it. What are we saying to pilots? We're saying hide your mental health, don't get help. Otherwise, we'll take away your ability to fly, which
Yeah,
is
will
probably
take away
leading to
your
more
livelihood.
pilots flying with depression or anxiety than taking a medication. So, yeah, it's actually
Okay.
scary when you think about it.
Yeah, yeah, and canceling my next flight.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right. So, how do you find that, since 2015, when you've gotten into all of this, you've talked a little bit about it, but how do you find that this has helped you? Kind of the main theme of the podcast is burnout and whatever else. How has this helped you? Like, what does this do for you psychologically, physically, whatever?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you and I are self confessed ADHD. So I think we're people who already value a mix in your life. I don't understand one thing being your entire passion. And so my job can't be all of that. And so having, an interesting hobby that's challenging psychologically and physically and lets me learn new skills and meet new people that I wouldn't, necessarily meet, come from different walks of life, just gives you another door to take part in something interesting. Um, and to do something that's kind of a childhood dream for me is, you know, extra rewarding to get up and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what kind of freedom does that give you? Like you have this, and like obviously you can go up and you can go and get a burger or a pie or something like that somewhere. But what kind of freedom
Yeah, I
does
mean,
this give you? Like,
I won't misrepresent me. I have not taken this as far as I would like to take it over the coming years, but I have friends who are very heavily into aviation, and they do. I mean, they'll fly themselves to Mexico. They'll One of the trips I want to do is just in the U.S., as you may know. There's all these things called FBOs, which are like little airports that are just sort of community general aviation airports.
yeah,
Canada's been sort of bad at keeping these around, but in the States,
they're
they're
everywhere.
they're everywhere, and they often have a little car for pilots with a key under the dash or something. So what I'd like to do is spend a summer just flying around airport to airport and seeing the small places, in Canada where I can, and certainly some of the U.S., which is supposed to be some beautiful flying down south.
So, where all can you go with this? Like, what kind of range with your plane and with the typical planes that doctors would have? And
Yeah,
what
it
kind of
depends.
planes
I
will
mean,
doctors have?
docs could have anything they want. I mean, it's all imagination and cost. So, I have a friend who's not a physician, but he has a twin engine aircraft. They're expensive to buy, probably $500,000, and they probably cost $1,000 an hour to run. So they're
Yeah.
not cheap. But if your mission is to take 6 friends or 7 friends and family somewhere and be able to fly across the country in it, that's a great choice. For something like a Cessna, that's a lot more local because the speeds it moves at, you can fly all across the country, but it's going to be a pretty slow go. Um, Mine, the downside is it only holds 2 people and a little bit of luggage, but it's got speed and it's got range. So I could probably do 800 to 1,000 kilometers on a tank of fuel. So could get over the
Wow.
Rockies. I still haven't done that again. As I say, I'm still building skills, but get across the Rockies and go visit friends in Alberta land, and eventually do some of those longer trips where you fly for 6 or 8 hours a day and plan out where you're going to go the next day and head off into the sky.
Huh. And are there limitations of kind of like where you can fly? Obviously, you're not going to fly over like a military base or
Yeah, yeah.
over an airport or something like that. Like you're not going to fly over Vancouver International or something like that, I would imagine.
You can fly over Vancouver National. You just have to talk to them ahead of time. So there's all of these
Okay.
classes of airspace. That's part of what you learn in your training. And so there's a couple of restricted types that you'll never go over, as you say, like Comox base. Um, but flying over an airport, you just have to know you're going to a control zone, and there's procedures for flying over the middle of an airport so that you're not anywhere near planes going up or down.
Okay.
Um, Restrictions going across the border. You have to stop fairly early to go through customs, just like you would anywhere else. So you have to have a point of entry, and there's some regulations around that. But in our big, beautiful country, you pretty much, I was going to say the sky's the limit, but the land is the limit. Whereas in Europe, I've got friends who fly in Europe, and there's a lot more regulations, a lot more expensive, so they don't get to take advantage like we do of the freedom of actually taking part in
Really?
aviation. Yeah. Yeah, which is crazy because there's so many close countries you want to fly to, right? But
Right? Yeah. I mean,
it's
they're like, take the train.
yeah,
Okay, fine. Here we have to take an airplane to go
yeah,
to the next state over, or
yeah,
next province over. I speak both American and Canadian,
yes.
and
Only a
over
slight
there they're
accent.
like, yeah. All right. So for somebody who wants to get started, or somebody who's, how do you get started? So there's this one person who is driving home this afternoon and is just totally just tired, needs something new, doesn't want to think about labs and, or another gallbladder or whatever. And they're just like, all right, I just want to do this. How do you
Yeah.
get started? What do you do?
Uh, you know, Start looking around online for local flight schools. That's probably where you start. Um, you can look for local flying clubs. You can look for local flying associations. In BC, we have the BC General Aviation Association, the BCGA, which has a huge presence online. It's very supportive of new pilots, so you can meet people there. But really, if you think you want to learn or at least try it out, you either reach out to someone you know with a plane, as in you and I going to Fino soon.
Yes.
But otherwise, you call a school and ask about the discovery flights, and they're, I say, quite reasonable, and they're always pretty excited to take a newbie up and show you why they have a passion for it. And from there, they can tell you about what sort of training they offer and their schedules and that sort of thing. And if you love it, you start the commitment. And because you
Okay.
don't pay up front, as we said before, you can start it. And if it turns out it's not for you, you've spent a few bucks and enjoyed some time learning something, right?
So your advice is just go.
Just
Just
go.
try it. Just do
Yeah.
it. There's pretty little commitment. You're not going to be flying the plane like by yourself the first
No.
time you do a discovery flight.
Yeah.
Like they're going to get you up, they're going to get you down,
Yeah.
and just let go, do it. Is
Yeah,
that
and
right?
your first 30 or 40 hours are going to be with someone in the plane with you, and more they're going to let you take control to the point where they watch you do entire flights, and then one day they tap you on the shoulder and they say, "I think you're ready," and they send you up for that first solo flight, and that is a crazy, crazy experience. When
Really?
you realize that you are all alone. And if you forget how to land or something, those are the worries that go through your head, right? Just like a code or something. Like, what if I forget
Yeah,
how to
yeah.
intubate
What if
or
I forget?
whatever, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
what if I forget chest compressions? Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It's fine. Don't
yeah.
worry.
So I haven't forgotten how to land yet. Thank God.
There are planes now that if you do forget how to land, you can pull the parachute, right? Like
They do have those. They're very expensive.
but so the point is buy a cheaper plane, but remember how to land. Okay,
Exactly.
got it.
Yeah. I mean, doctor, maybe you can, not in our specialty, but an ophthalmologist could get a nice Cirrus, which is the type of plane with the parachute. Those have a great backup.
There you go. What about jets? Do you have to have like
Oh,
special ratings for jets and
yeah,
things
wouldn't
like
that be
that?
fun? That's a
Yeah.
great.
Now, I'm pretty sure that the founders of Google, that they actually have Russian MiGs. They actually, if you have that much money, then great, you can get a Russian MiG and go hang out with Sergey Brin, and fly him off the coast of California with Sergey Brin. But what about
Yeah.
other smaller jets, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, the L-39 Albatross is a military jet that there was a guy in Canada who had one who would offer flights. He was an old military pilot and bought one. I mean, those are very, very expensive. The training is expensive. The maintenance is expensive. It's unlikely most of us are going to be able to do that just on our doctor work.
Any other advice that you might have, especially for younger people earlier in their practice, and maybe people mid-career who are closer to paying off their student loans or anything else?
Okay, so one of the things to think about is this can be a work expense for a physician. I know some doctors who did their training so that they could fly around to smaller communities, often in the north, to provide medical care. And at that point, there are ways of absolutely making this part of your corporation expense. There's all sorts of ways, as you can imagine, as long as you're using it for work, to make at least part of it an expense. So that's something you might consider if you're that sort of rural physician. Um, if you're just like where I was a little not that young, but younger in my career, and wanted a challenge, and it had been the dream. Again, just get out there and do it. Ask around. You'll be surprised that you've got colleagues that do it. And I'll tell you, like, if any of my colleagues want to go for a flight, I'd be more than happy to take them. So, pilots tend to like taking newbies up and showing their plane and
showing
whatnot.
their stuff.
So, yeah. And it's always kind. You can tell them you'll pay for gas. As a non-commercial pilot, you can't accept money for flying someone anywhere, but they can pay for the fuel. So,
they can pay for the fuel, also buy you a burger, things like that.
Exactly. Or a beer afterwards when we're not going to fly anymore. For
afterwards,
the day.
Not before. Right.
Not before.
Get the order right.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate you coming on. And I do, again, I think that we have officially diagnosed at least you with ADHD. And I do think that you are hopefully going to be able to come back and we can talk about all of the other things that you have done. There are space medicine, dive medicine, like literally went to NASA school. So we're going to have to talk about that because that's really, really cool. And maybe we can fly on your plane and at some point I'll get scuba dive certified and we can fly off and go scuba dive somewhere.
Exactly. You can be invited on the trips,
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll get the bends and then you can practice.
I'll treat you. Yeah.
It'll be great.
Maybe we'll record a little something for this podcast in the plane and then it's a write-off the whole trip.
The whole thing.
Because doctors love a good write-off. Now, thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun, Rob. We've been talking about our lives forever, and it was fun to do it in this format. And I would love to chat about other things again sometime. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jeff Kerrie. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Interesting MD podcast. Please check out my content on YouTube at Interesting MD and follow me on TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at The Interesting MD and on X at Interesting MD. If you have comments or questions and want to get in touch with me or any of my guests, please DM me on socials or email me at rob@interestingmd.com. If you have any ideas for a show and you want to share your hobbies with me or don't know where to get started on your own project, you can email ideas@interestingmd.com. Please like and subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel to get the latest content. Much appreciation to Falter Media for editing, producing, and posting all Interesting MD content. Check them out because if they can do this for me, imagine what they can do for you. See you next week.